All right. Hello and welcome to the episode 13 of the Rogue Health Economist. I'm your host, James Maskell, and this has been Immunity Week. And all week we are talking to people about this next iteration of our understanding of the immune system. And I'm super excited to welcome a really good friend in here today. Mike Mutzel is a leader in the space of functional nutrition, and he has been on the cutting edge. And Mike, one of the reasons I wanted to get you in here more than anything else is I just love the vibe that you put out on Instagram. If you want to check out Mike on Instagram, it's Metabolic Mike. But yeah, the meme quality is super strong, and I just get a good chuckle. But it's not really a chuckle. It's actually just more of a reality check, because I think we're living in unprecedented times. So this week has all been about immunity. We've talked about immune resilience, and I guess let's just start there. Like, what is the kind of conversation that is currently about immunity? What's being missed, and what would you like everyone to know about our immunity at these times?
Amazing. Yeah. What a great place to start with, James, because, when we see mainstream media, I mean, we hear we need to wash our hands, we need to cover our face, we need to, shelter in place. And while that may be good to help to, reduce transmission, reduce exposure to a pathogen, that really doesn't do much to really enhance our body's innate immune system capacity. And if we look at how other animals coexist with human coronaviruses, such as the virus that infected bats that presumably jumped to humans that we're dealing with now, the SARS-CoV-2, we know that these animals have a really robust and early initial interferon response, and that's how they are able to, and these animals I'm speaking to you about is bats, and scientists at Duke University have been studying the immune response. And so, to make a long story short, we're not being taught much about our body's own innate immune system. A lot of people are making really poor food choices. Alcohol consumption is up. If you look at Kellogg's and in the brand of Kellogg's and all the processed, cereals and crackers and things like that, their revenues are up 30% right now. So we need to realize that our diet impacts our innate immune system, and our innate immune system is so critical at helping our body mount an initial early and robust immune response that can help to prevent increased viral load. So unfortunately, we're not hearing about that in the mainstream media, and I'm not really sure why that is. I think it's a nuanced kind of a complex conversation. Perhaps it would affect advertising dollars on CNN or MSNBC or one of these major news networks. I'm not really sure. But yeah, we could do a lot. And so if we look at disease severity, it's not really uniform. I mean, if we look at, and I've been following this since March, the clinical case reports and some of the immunopathology reports from Wuhan, then from Italy, and then of course we have New York now. And if you look at this, I mean, obviously, the case fatality or infectious fatality ratio varies by age, but also within the age brackets, if you have a comorbid condition, obesity, hypertension, diabetes, low lymphocyte count, lymphocytopenia, as doctors will talk about, then the disease severity is much higher. And so these are malleable conditions. And I know you've interviewed many other people, throughout your career, James, and that are going to watch this video. There's a lot of things we can do right now to modulate our blood glucose levels. One cell metabolism study report stratified individuals for their glycemic variability. So the swings, the troughs and valleys in one's blood sugar level, and a tighter glycemic variability was associated with reduced need for hospitalization, reduced death, reduced requirement for various anti-inflammatory compounds, drugs, things like that, corticosteroids, antimicrobials. So, we can impact how this bug, or any bug likely, will impact our body's physiology by making healthy lifestyle choices, by eating healthier foods. Of course, I'm biased. I have experienced a lot of benefits from the ketogenic diet, but if people do a low-carb paleo style approach, I mean, you can really help to minimize the swings in glucose. We know that type 2 diabetics, not only do they have increased disease severity with this particular condition, but increased need for hospitalization, ventilation, and increased mortality. And so there's a lot of things we can do. And all these, what's really not being talked about, but I think actually David Sinclair and colleagues at Harvard University just recently published this paper, which was really exciting. And it has to do with the age of our immune system. So you and I are in our 30s, right? I mean, you're 38?
39, yeah.
39. Okay, so I'm 37, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean that our immune system is also 37. Our immune system, if we've been making healthy lifestyle choices, might be 32. It might be 42. It could be 52. And I think this is where this disconnect between chronologic age and biologic age is not really being talked about. And so we're hearing in the mainstream media, healthy 32-year-old triathlete is hospitalized and is on a ventilator. We're like, okay, well, if you dig a little bit deeper into that story, there was an Ironman triathlete, formerly overweight, pre-diabetic, et cetera, that really got hammered with COVID-19 in Minnesota, and this made national news. And so it's kind of interesting if you think about, just if we pick that one story apart and we relate it back to the age of our immune system. Heavy endurance training, high volume training is an immunological stressor. So you're like, well, you can't really just look at one's age and then ascertain their immune system strength. And what we're seeing based upon the work of Steve Horvath and other folks, this epigenetic clock phenomenon, where we now can figure out by looking at, really our immune cells and look at the epigenetic and methylation patterns, we can see where we are on our aging trajectory. Are we supporting our longevity, or are we, accelerating that? And so I think the take home for me is all these diseases. Hypertension is advanced aging of your blood vessels. I mean, if you want to break it down very simply, one of our mutual friend of ours, Mark Houston, has talked about this forever. And if we look at obesity, accelerated aging, the so-called thymic involution, your thymus is an immunological organ where a lot of our T helper cells and naive immune cells originate, and then they go out and become differentiated and specialized within the body. As we age, our thymus gland naturally basically atrophies, but we can accelerate the rate at which our thymus gland is atrophying, and this is called thymus involution. And this is what's interesting. If you look at the people that are really getting hammered with this COVID-19, it's not just the old people, it's people that have diseases that are characterized by increased or accelerated aging of their immune system. And and this is called immunosenescence. And so anyway, getting back to that paper by...
Yeah, because I just saw this study that I want to get your thoughts on. This was the largest study on COVID-19 fatality. So in order the risk factors. So age is the highest, then cancers of the blood, then male, then obesity, then diabetes. Those are the 5 biggest risk factors for that. So, I think you just explained it pretty clearly, some of the pieces in there. I guess I'd love for you to go a little bit deeper into that. I'd also just like to go, like, maybe we can get to this in a minute, but or maybe this is the best place to start. Like, how quickly, if you decide today, okay, I'm going to build my immune resilience, like I'm going to eat right, I'm going to do it. How quickly does improvement show in your functionality?
This is a great question, James. And, it's kind of like if I were to, let's say I had $100,000 in debt, right? How quickly could I get out of debt? If I had if I had $20,000, I can get out of debt much quicker. So I think we all need to be really brutally honest with ourselves and think, okay, have I been living a relatively unhealthy life my entire life? Well, it could take longer to get out of that quote unquote chronic disease debt or metabolic debt than it would be if, say, you know what, during this COVID-19, lockdown, I've been making poorer food choices than I normally do. I've been drinking more. One or 2 weeks of really cleaning house could probably massively move the pendulum. But as you know, and many people that have been on your show talk about, the body, the brain are really malleable. I mean, people that have been morbidly obese and type 2 diabetic, they make some sweeping, lifestyle changes, and within a year can really get back to almost like an unrecognizable version of themselves that has been upgraded, so to speak. So to answer your question, I think there is some sort of degree to which we need to understand how much quote unquote debt someone has created. That being said, if you look at some studies, and I'm biased, so everyone realize that. If you look at studies on fasting, intermittent fasting, people that are new to this, if they do a 36-hour fast, within that, just a day and a half of no food, you see statistically significant increases in a myriad of different immunological parameters. So while it might take a very long time to really hit the reset button, I think it's likely and probable that within a few weeks' time, if someone takes these things seriously, you could lose 5-7 pounds. I mean, I had one client just not too recently ago. Him and his girlfriend both got infected with COVID-19. He started doing intermittent fasting and a low carb ketogenic style diet in January. They got infected in the end of March. She wasn't doing any of that. Now they have different health challenges and things like that. He had more of an insulin resistance type phenomenon, pre-diabetic, but to make a long story short, she got really hammered by this, didn't need to be hospitalized, but was really down. Her O2 saturation dropped to like 70 something. I mean, she was really struggling, right? Whereas he felt like he had the flu for a few days. Now, you just mentioned earlier, some of the known characterizations that increase disease severity. Being male is one of them. And so, being that they're the same age, logic would suggest that being male would lead him to have increased disease severity. But I really believe that some of the things that we were doing, and it was just literally 6 weeks of intermittent fasting, ketogenic style diet, 2 people, same bug, same disease, one had a totally different outcome. So if that's an N of 1 or N of 2, but to make a long story short, I think I want to give people hope and realize that we can make sweeping changes very quick. Anyone can go to a Rite Aid or a CVS or a drugstore, start testing their glucose, get a glucometer. They can track their heart rate variability with something like the Oura Ring, or even do heart math. And you can see just one meditative session can change your heart rate variability. So yeah, I think it's doable, it's achievable, and studies really show that we should. And here's an example, right? And what I like to do is look at some of the published research to see just a few nights of sleep deprivation. I was reading about vaccine efficacy, because a lot of people they have this belief that, I'm just going to wait on my couch until there's a vaccine. Life will be totally normal when there is a vaccine. But what's assumed in that way of thinking is vaccine effectiveness is uniform, but it's very variable based upon, because you get the vaccine, your immune system has to do the work. You still need to have these antigen presenting cells to send the message to your B cells to then make antibodies. So if that communication changes, or if that system of physiology is imbalanced because you have background smoldering chronic inflammation, then logic would assume, and studies suggest, that vaccine effectiveness wouldn't be there. And where I was going with this story is just a few nights of poor sleep in a clinical study showed that vaccine antibody titers to the influenza virus vaccine were reduced compared to individuals that didn't have sleep deprivation. So, we know just a few nights of bad sleep is going to change your immune system response. And yeah, so I think we all need to realize that the choices we make really do matter right now. And this the SARS-CoV-2 may not be the last superbug that we're exposed to. I mean, it's probably unlikely. And it's probably unlikely. I think the World Health Organization sent out a report yesterday that this thing's probably not just going to go away. It's probably going to be something we're going to have to deal with for a long time.
Yeah, that's super, super interesting. I think so you've started putting out a lot of memes on your Instagram account, and I know that those memes travel pretty far around the internet. What are some of the sort of things that the sort of things that come up in people's mind that sort of end up being like that, where their mind is changed by the content that you're putting out? What are some sort of previously held beliefs that you're trying to chip away at?
Yeah, I think the biggest one lately is that people think that this virus or infectious pathogens affect everyone the same. No matter who you are, the immunological response is going to be the same. And I think that's the biggest one, where people are like, wow, I didn't realize that these conditions that you've been alluding to, diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, blood cancers, et cetera, these conditions increase the severity of the disease. I think for a lot of people that, they think the human being is, everyone responds the same to something. And that's been a big one, I think. And also the changes that diet have on, and individual variability when it comes to, say, carbohydrate intake. Some people do well on a low carb diet, some people don't, right? So I think that idea of, I guess, to paint a broad, swath on this conversation, bio-individuality has been something that I think is new to a lot of people in the public sphere. I mean, if you come from functional medicine, we know this because we know about SNPs and genes and epigenetics, but, you know, because Instagram's largely a layperson medium, that's what I've found to be really unique is like these things that you or I could have conversations with Mark Hyman about. When you say that to people of a lay audience, are like, oh, I guess I never thought about that. You know, a lot of people think that the only thing that affects glucose is food. And we know there's a lot of non-nutritional factors: sleep, stress management, exercise, you know, mindset, heat exposure, cold exposure. All these things affect our body's glucose level. And that's been a big one for people like, oh, wow, I didn't know stress could affect your glucose. I wore a continuous glucose monitor a few years ago and had this incident in a Toronto airport. My glucose went through the roof. And people were like, dude, you're diabetic. Like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, no, it's called stress. So yeah, that's been kind of interesting.
That's a really great point. And yeah, let's jump into that a little bit more, because obviously like the sort of big news is your blood sugar handling is going to affect your ability to mount an immune response. And, you know, ultimately, you know, some of the memes that I've really enjoyed have been things like, you know, people wearing masks in a Walmart at the same time as buying like a whole thing of Cheetos that's taken out, like those kind of things that are really interesting because the picture tells the story, which is like, you might be worried about the wrong thing. But, you know, one of the things that I've sort of shared on early episodes of this show is that once people start measuring themselves consistently and in interesting ways like continuous glucose monitoring, functional medicine will just be the medicine because people will see what the impact of these different things have. So maybe you could just go into a little bit like what did you learn about sleep, stress, and exercise and community and food through sort of that journey of self-experimentation that you've been on?
I love that. One thing I do just want to, as a preface to that conversation, one thing I was taught, you know, because I've been in this space like you, James, since 2006, and I had always heard that eating sugar affects your immune system, and it just became one of these things that it was inked in my head. I didn't know where it came from, and I shared a study, a little meme on Instagram that actually people were really interested in, and it was a glucose tolerance test. So basically, 73 grams of refined sugar given, you know, to ascertain whether or not someone has poor ability to rebalance blood sugar levels and insulin response. And that was altered all these different key immune cells that are pertinent to this time right now: lymphocytes, neutrophils, all types of CD4 and CD8 T helper cells, which are involved in the antibody production. All of these things basically tanked just after a standard routine glucose tolerance test. So I just want people to realize that, you know, we hear that sugar, processed foods is bad for our immune system. And that's why you're kind of alluding to, you know, some of the memes where there was one man in Kentucky, he tried to buy 522 containers of Mountain Dew and he was refused. But, you know, so people think that, oh, well, if I'm wearing a mask, wearing gloves, that I could eat whatever I want, but that's not really the case. And there's really good data showing that blood sugar affects our immune system. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. What's cool now is there's really more democratized ability to test our glucose levels in real time. It used to be that you had to convince your doctor that even though you don't have diabetes, you should get this continuous glucose monitor. But now there's companies like NutriSense and others that are saying, hey, look, and they have dietitians on staff and so forth. So the continuous glucose monitor testing, I think I recommend this to clients all the time, especially ones who are not sure what is causing their glucose levels because they go to their doctor and they're told they have prediabetes and they don't know what it is because they feel like they're eating healthily. But yeah, I found that food is probably 60% of it, but in that other 40%, it's the movement, it's the stress, it's not only sleep duration, but sleep quality. Do they have subclinical sleep disorder breathing? Are they snoring? Are they restless? Are they breathing through their mouth? Do they wake up with a dry mouth? And, you know, we can get into mouth taping and all that. But I think that's a big one. And, and I think, you know, to kind of piggyback on our mutual friend, Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, and some of the social connection piece of it, I think a lot of people right now are eating out of boredom or isolation. So that weaves into it. All the emotional baggage, we can take out our emotion and our loneliness on food, you know, and That's a big one. I think people are like, gosh, I'm craving carbohydrates. I'm craving junk food. I'm craving this stuff, but they're really craving connection and being with people. And the way that they kind of get some of that neurologic stimuli, if you will, is probably with food. So that to me is a really big one, that I think people are not, we're not, normally in times of crisis, people come together, right? If there's a tornado, a hurricane, whatever, we get together, we help. But now we're being taught, hey, we have this crisis, but we all have to go to our silos. And it's really counter of like how, humans normally solve problems. And I think and we're being told that this may happen for a long time. And there's no real light at the end of the tunnel, right? It's not like, oh yeah, I can go to my wedding in April, or I can go to my wedding in August. It's like, you may not have a wedding this year. It could be virtual. It's so weird. So I think that's where the glucose monitor comes in. That's where, like you said, functional medicine is going to it's going to be the things people do to realize that, how they can live in to talk and to use a word that Jeff Bland talks a lot about, scientific wellness. I think that's kind of where these technologies are going to come. So it's really exciting.
Yeah. So going from where we are now forward, like obviously we've got a few months here. There's talk of like a second wave. Like obviously one of the things we've been thinking about is like, how can we, prepare people to be kind of hard to kill, right, in the future. And I think you shared that, these things can happen significantly in just a couple of months. And if you really, go into it, obviously having read the book or wrote the book earlier this year on group visits, like I'm very excited about the idea of bringing groups of people together, even in a virtual setting, to be able to work on some of these, fundamentals of health creation, provide support and accountability. And I know, like, I know that you've been involved in all different types of like group exercise and those kind of things. Like, what are your thoughts on sort of how it's obviously like a big ask to base a solution on behavior change, because behavior change hasn't really worked, right? And I guess I just wanted to get into that because I know you work with people one-on-one, and then you're also like educating en masse. What do you think are the sort of keys to behavior change that we need to understand if we're going to make an impact?
It's a beautiful question. I'm not sure, James. I really think that when it comes to behavioral change, someone needs to have, what I've found is clients need to have a big scare. They get blood work back and there's something really bad, or someone dies in their family that is healthier than them, something like that. But I feel like the social aspect is really key, and the community element is really important for sustaining behavioral change. So some people, a lot of people get excited in January about losing weight, and maybe they don't have a friend, maybe their spouse is not on board, so they make a few changes, and then by February comes, they're back to their normal habits. So I think this is where community matters, and unfortunately, it's hard right now to form real in-person community connections. And I'm referring to maybe going to the gym and doing group fitness classes, because I found just with myself, I've been lifting weights since I was 14. I'm 37. I would, sometimes if I don't feel good or whatever, I'm tired, I don't go to the gym. But if I have a group of friends that I'm training with, I don't miss that no matter what. And also my decisions the day before, should I have that glass of wine? Well, no, I have this weightlifting thing in the morning, so I'm definitely not going to have any alcohol. I'm going to eat right. I'm going to go to bed early. So when you are relying upon other people and you have that accountability, to me, that really helps to cement and solidify behavioral change. So I think people should, still work out with their friends that they used to work out with, or try to go walking with your neighbor, being outdoors. I mean, I know in LA, you have to supposedly wear a mask on the beach. I think that's pretty ridiculous. So I think trying to create those networks still and maintain them the best that you can right now would be good. And if not, maybe virtually, and having that accountability could be good. So a group Zoom call, catching up FaceTime with multiple people, a group text, something. I think it's really important and imperative right now to make sure that we maintain that. So that's what I found. And so any practitioners tuning in, I mean, I think, the one-on-one consults are great, but doing, like you said, group visits or once a week group calls where you get a bunch of people on there, it's something that people can look forward to. I mean, a Zoom call is not as good as being in person, but it's the second best that we can do right now. I found that to be helpful. So I've been doing webinars and meetups and stuff like that with our email list subscribers, and they really dig it. Like attendance is much higher than it normally is because people are craving this stuff.
So let me ask you, there's two other things that I see that you do in your lifestyle that I know are healthy, and I just want you to talk into it for our community. The first is nature. And obviously, there's some restrictions being put on some nature, but those kind of things are opening up. Why is nature such an important part of creating health in the medium term?
It's amazing, James. I mean, we can get into all the scientific studies on Shinrin Roku and forest bathing, but I mean, to make a long story, you just feel better when you're in nature. I mean, most people do. This is why people go on vacations. They go offline and go hiking. They go camping. They go on a wilderness adventure. So, yeah, we're just so disconnected from nature, and unfortunately, due to the lack of specificity of the government, and recommendations from the World Health Organization, people are scared to leave their home. I have my neighbor to this direction of me. They have a 7-year-old daughter, just like Inez. They literally, James, I'm not even kidding, have not left their home for about 90 days. I mean, their cars have been parked in the same spot. FedEx comes every day to drop off whatever it is, food or this or that. I never see them leave their home. And it's crazy because I think people are so scared that if they go outside, there's some virus that's going to be aerosolized and infect them. But the PPE and the mask wearing, this is great, and it's been studied in confined spaces where air movement is stagnant. But out in nature, the probability, and plus it's getting warmer here anyway, so people need to get out in nature. And so one of the ways that we've encouraged this in our household, and we have backyard chickens. I know not everyone can have chickens, but they force you to get up first thing in the morning because they're making a bunch of noise. You have to expose your retina to eyes. It helps your whole circadian rhythm become realigned. A lot of people complain about adrenal fatigue, and they don't realize they have HPA axis dysfunction, and their circadian clock can be messed up. So yeah, nature is important. It sounds woo-woo, but there's a lot of data now. I mean, even just looking at being indoors and looking at a picture of a nature reserve affects cortisol release and thinking. So thankfully, we do have a lot of Western science that have kind of characterized the physiology of being exposed to nature. And I just want to emphasize, I might take some heat for this, but I think everyone should be doubling down on their nature time right now and getting outside and exploring. Schools are closed. Kids love it. I mean, kids will complain at first because they'd much rather probably be on screens eating ice cream, but get them outside. It's been amazing. So we've been going on a lot more hikes, a lot more bike rides with my daughter, and she's like the happiest she's been. So I can't say enough positive about it.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've done over the last a month and a half, as soon as everything was shut down with my CrossFit gym, we started doing half an hour family fitness in the afternoon. So we have a Tabata timer that I got. It's just an app. And so we do 3 stations, and we change the thing every day. And, it's the first, we do 2 8-minute rounds. And ultimately what we found is, but like my wife and I have been really enjoying it. And actually, I've never been more consistent with exercise. It's not as tiring as some of the workouts that I did in CrossFit, but certainly like the consistently of just doing it every day has made a big difference. But also you can see like over the month and a half, like my daughter is more interested in it. Like she's interested in running around, she's dancing, holding the weights, like she's doing slightly different stuff from us. But just, I feel like I never had that growing up. Like all of my, sport was all like team sports and doing sports at school, and just having some sort of structure inside the family unit to facilitate ongoing exercise being a game changer. And it's, I think these are habits that won't go away when things go back to wherever they go.
I hope not. That's amazing, James. And I think it's really important for kids right now because it's really a shame. All their sports are canceled till who knows when. And sports can really be, structured sports, like you mentioned, can be great for kids, learning how to, collaborate and teamwork. And then plus it gets them moving. So I think if families can do more stuff together, it's amazing. And hopefully, I mean, that's the silver lining of this whole thing is hopefully people will come away with the idea and they'll realize that, hey, I got to really double down on my lifestyle choices because there's a lot of unknowns and uncertainty when it comes to immunological, and virulent bugs in this world. And there is a differential response based upon your health. And it's statistically speaking, right? I mean, there's 15 fatalities a year when it comes to helicopter crashes. Kobe Bryant happened to be one of those 15, but statistically speaking, flying in a helicopter is very safe. Now it seems dangerous because Kobe Bryant recently died, but so there will be some relatively healthy people that are young that probably die of coronavirus, and there's documented cases of that. But by and large, this thing is differentially affecting people that have made unhealthy choices. So the silver lining is this is the impetus, this is the drive, hopefully the motivating factor for people to realize that, yeah, their diet choices matter. Like they need to make healthier choices. And that has a lot of translative, it helps you feel better, right? When you're eating better, you're moving, your mood is better, your hormones are better, your vitality, all these things improve. So
Yeah.
hopefully that's.
Yeah, that's bang on. Well, look, the premise of this whole thing, the Rogue Health Economist, is really like outlining what it would take for society to break trend on the massive increase in health costs and start to break trend and go down. And I'd love to just get your thoughts on that. I mean, obviously we've talked about functional medicine, we've talked about community, now we're talking about immunity, and now obviously we're talking about metabolism. My thesis is really like it's a combination of these kind of things that are going to be needed to break trend, because ultimately having more and more people just on like lifetime dependence on medication is the sort of what's causing this trend. And I'm just wondering if you had any insight on this from sort of like that side of the conversation, because ultimately, we've had some very interesting people share their opinions, and I'd really love to get into yours.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know of a single one thing that would break that trend, but I think if we look at the patterns that I see in the people that I work with, and it could be a unique, different population from other people, but I see a lot of people that are on the train of developing on the path, on the freeway of developing diabetes, pre-diabetes. So their liver enzymes are increased, they have high fasting glucoses and everything like that. And if we look at the medical expenditures associated with treating diabetes, from a medical standpoint, and then also the societal costs, increase, sick days, reduced productivity, et cetera. I mean, it's very expensive. So if we can just get people to realize that and start testing their glucose. A lot of people are walking around with prediabetes and they don't know it until they start to look at their blood levels. So again, I'm biased, but if we could help people look at their liver tests and their blood glucose levels to see if they're on the path of developing diabetes and diabetes associated problems like fatty liver disease, which is on the rise, I think we could really, flatten the curve, so to speak, on medical expenditures, especially the diabetes associated diseases like heart disease, like strokes, like cancers, depression, things like that. So it's unfortunate that we're more sedentary than we've ever been, and that processed food is basically at every convenience store and grocery store. And I think people still have in their mind that they need to have 200 grams of glucose per day from food to fuel the brain, but we now know that's not really based on hard science. Your brain can make an alternative called ketones that readily can fuel neuronal activity. So I think people, basically three things: compressing their feeding window, number one. Everyone can do this. I don't care, even if they're on a high carb diet, if they start eating within a more confined period of time. And, something as simple, I have clients just start out, hey, just fast for 12 hours a day. You can do that, right? Even if you eat late, like if you eat a dinner at 8 o'clock at night, don't have any food until 8 or 9 the next day. Most people can do that. By just doing that, Sachin Panda and other folks have found, even when folks don't change their diet, they get a nice reduction in triglycerides and improvement in insulin sensitivity. Number two, even if you don't change your diet, you're eating processed food, increase your physical activity. Go for a walk after meals. I went to a vegan restaurant wearing a continuous glucose monitor and said, hey, give me your most popular items. And it was pizza, it was bread, it was all this. My glucose went higher than it's ever been since I started testing, that is. And I just went for a brisk 20-minute walk, brought it down. The delta was 70 points. It was crazy. So just walking, even if you eat crappy food, right? Or if you don't change your diet, you can't afford healthy food, whatever, go for a walk after the meal. It's going to bring down that glucose level. And then number three would be, unless you're a competitive athlete, you're training for some specific endurance or physical event, you don't need to have high levels of carbohydrates. Think of carbohydrates as a sport specific fuel. And just look, if you're going to be sitting all day, you're traveling, you don't need 2 cups of white rice. You can do fine with some lean protein and vegetables and some fat maybe. So just reframe the conversation about the need and necessity for carbohydrates. It's not that they're bad. They can be great in specific contexts. If you're training for the Tour de France, you probably need more carbohydrates, right? So those 3 things can, low cost, accessible to everyone, even in the worst communities in the United States, and can have a high impact in terms of health and well-being and everything.
I love that. No, that's very concise and totally on point. Well, I guess the last thing I just want to ask you about is, ultimately, up until now, we haven't maybe as a society done the healthy choices, but look, we at least have had the chance to do it, the freedom to choose what we do. And mainly we've chosen those kind of things. And I guess I just would love to just, get whatever commentary you have on, what you feel is sort of like the state of the union right now with regard to our ability to continue to make the healthiest choices for ourselves and our family, where your areas of concern that you have and possible areas where you feel like other people who are listening to this need to sort of wake up to the potential of what it's going to, are we able to create long-term health?
It's a good question. I mean, I do worry. I think there's so much conflicting information for people out there. They go to the grocery store and buy. They look for gluten-free. They look for non-GMO, organic, and a lot of people are still consuming a lot of extra sugar in their diet and stuff like that. So I think the information is there for people, but I worry a lot about the kids, James. And I know Kalyana is young, so you see some of the kids maybe at school. I see the childhood obesity is sky high, and I see the influence in the educational system. There's a birthday every week. There's Halloween. There's Valentine's Day. There's a lot of opportunities to have a lot of processed foods and sugar, and I feel like people are just they think kids need to be kids. And then we know that this recidivism, overweight kids, obese kids, they don't suddenly become lean once they're 18 and all of a sudden change their diet, right? You indelibly ink these feeding patterns and food preferences. It's hard to break that. So I'm hopeful that adults can make appropriate decisions for themselves. I'm less optimistic that our generation of younger children, unless their parents are as into this as we are, will make healthy choices. So I think it's really important that we stress to parents, and I have this, and I'm, now that I've seen all the PPE shaming, like I used to hold back when it came to talking about food, but now I've been shamed for not wearing a mask, even at Whole Foods before, by people. So I'm going to be a little bit more vocal about some of the stuff that people are feeding kids. So I'm optimistic that we can make changes, but I see there's not enough societal push to help kids make better choices, and that's a part that scares me.
Yeah. Well, look, the one thing that is clear is that when society wants something, they can shift to facilitate it. I mean, we've seen that with everything to do with staying indoors, and people do things for the right reasons. And I guess my hope is that we can take advantage of, that energy towards really creating health. I really appreciate what you said. And I actually had an experience last week. So it was my daughter's 7th birthday. And, she doesn't know what Coke is even today.
Mm.
Right. And there's certain things that she is just not aware of. And so, last week, we really let her eat whatever she wanted, and she got to make this huge cake, and, family and whatever did the wrong thing with bringing over too many cakes. But it was very interesting. My wife and I definitely noticed there was a significant change in behavior over 4 days.
Mm.
And getting that back took a while. Like we're 9 days after the birthday now, and just because she's been so good for so long, and then having the moment where it was just like all things are off because it was her 7th birthday, and she's now a little bit more clear on like what she wants. Just the change in behavior with regard to significant sugar intake was absolutely noticeable, and I don't need any more science to show me that. So obvious that it was happening in my home. So
yeah,
completely agree with what you said, and I think that I guess one thing that was said to me yesterday, which I think is really interesting, is that COVID definitely broke some inertia in a lot of different ways, like with the way that things have been. And I think there's a real opportunity to use that inertia break for doing things anew. And appreciate all the things that you're sharing online. If you want to find out more about Mike, check out Metabolic Mike on Instagram, High Intensity Health on YouTube, tons of great content on there. All this conversation about, metabolic health, metabolic flexibility, metabolic resistance and resilience, I think are all, this conversation about resilience is so huge. And I just appreciate all of the input here today. Mike, thanks so much for being part of the podcast, and appreciate your work and look forward to some future collaborations.
Sounds good, James. Thanks so much for having me on, and everyone tuning in. Hopefully there's some tips in there of benefit. So appreciate it.
All right. The Rogue Health Economist podcast. We are back next week. Next week is Chronic Disease Week. So we are going on the train. We're going to be talking to people reversing chronic disease. We're going to be people talking about tabulating chronic disease. It's going to be one hell of a ride. Hope to see you then. Thanks so much from the Rogue Health Economist podcast. We'll be back on Monday, and we'll see you then.